Hey, everybody, it's Natalie Bencavanga, and welcome to another edition of Facts Over Fear. This is an Easter edition, and that's going to make sense here in a minute. Easter Sunday was just yesterday, everyone, if you're tuning in live, and it's a day that's usually meant to symbolize peace, resurrection, and Christian faith. Donald Trump just thought he would, celebrate the moment by going on Truth Social and threatening to bomb Iran's infrastructure, and then ended his post with "Praise be to Allah." So let's just let that sit in for a second, because that's really a message about violence wrapped in religious language, posted on one of Christianity's holiest of days, and still largely met with loyalty from the same political movement that claims to be defending Christian values. Because here's the thing, though. In his movement, that wasn't an outlier, right? That was more of a window into how religion is being used, not just as belief, but as branding, as identity and power, and increasingly as a product. So a new company is really taking this to a whole new level, you guys. Radiant Mobile just launched on Easter the first ever Christian wireless service, a phone plan that promises not just coverage, but a curated, faith-based digital experience complete with filtered content, Christian programming, and an ecosystem designed around a specific worldview. So it raises a much bigger question that we're about to dig into and do a deep dive today on. What happens when ideology isn't something you believe, but something that you buy into, literally? Literally. So joining me today is Jess Britvich, my girl. She is back to help us break down how that system is working, from content pipelines to consumer ecosystems, and how it connects directly to the political power of white Christian nationalism. Jess, thanks so much. And happy Easter.
Yes, happy Easter. Oh my gosh, I was trying to keep my facial expressions to a minimum over here, but just that
You don't have to do that.
What is happening? I mean, what is happening? Just the words I never thought I'd hear together, from that tweet or whatever you're calling it, that Truth Social or whatever, from Trump to now Radiant Mobile. It's just, what timeline are we in? But I think once we break this down a little bit more, it's going to make more sense how we're here now and why we are, but still, just on the surface, it just makes me shake my head.
Oh, I know. And, you and I, we've talked on the surface about this issue before with Radiant Mobile, but this really, now that it's officially launched, seemed like the perfect time to really dig into it. But before we do that, let's take a step back. Let's just start with some definitions.
Yeah.
When we say white Christian nationalism, what are we actually talking about? How is this different from just someone's personal spiritual beliefs?
100%. I think it's really important that we start by defining this, because it's a phrase that we hear thrown around a lot.
Yeah.
But I think it's really important to understand the difference between, like you said, personal religion and white Christian nationalism. So white Christian nationalism is the belief that America is and should remain a Christian nation, specifically one built and governed by white Christian values. So the idea of separation of church and state be gone. It rejects, like I said, separation of church and state, and often opposes equality for people of color, women, LGBTQ people, religious minorities, the non-religious, really any marginalized group, anyone who falls outside of that white Christian nationalist. It's very patriarchal. It's tied to all of that as well. And this ideology traces back to the early or the late 1600s, where adherents believed that the U.S. was founded as a Christian nation with laws and institutions modeled after Protestant ideals, with a mission to spread the religion in the face of threats from non-whites, non-Christians, and immigrants. And I think that phrasing is really important, that idea of threats. And we hear a lot of that in the marketing for things like Christian Mobile, or in the ideology that's pushed a lot in some of these spaces that are pushing more of this white Christian ideal. So those are definitions that are from the AU.org and from Yale as well. These are larger ideologies, so there's not usually, sometimes there's some give and take on some of these definitions, but the overall broader idea is that America needs to be governed by these white Christian nationalist ideals. And we're going to see that in policy, in schools, in public places, in federal places, things like that.
Guys, we always come with receipts, okay? Jess has things cited. She has sources. This is we're doing it the right way.
That's right.
Because it's really important that we all understand exactly what we're up against and what we're talking about. And before we move on to my next question, I just wanted to add to your point that they've been hiding in plain sight this agenda, right? This isn't something that we should be surprised about. This is something that the right has been building on for decades now, in particular, ever since the 1960s, when we had sort of the civil rights movement and the first wave feminist movement. There has been this wanting to return to the sense of the good old days, but good for whom, right? It's
Right.
for white Christian heteronormative men that are property owners and sort of rule society and public life. And I think that's why we are seeing such pushback in this moment, because we know that whiteness is being threatened as more women and more people of color and more vulnerable groups start to find their way in the world and have started to, be able to accumulate some sense of capital under this sort of like hellscape framework that we're living in.
Yes, and I think that idea of white supremacy that I think we're trying to see be pushed back upon, and it really is that larger system that's in play. That's a fabric throughout all of our society that really
Yeah.
intertwines with. I think that's a piece that sometimes gets left out of the Christian nationalist conversation, is how much it is also tied to white supremacy.
Yes.
And I think that's something that I think we want to keep in mind as we continue this conversation as well.
Absolutely. So if you're just joining me, I'm Natalie Bencavanga. I'm here with my girl, Jess Britvich, and we are breaking it down today, guys, because Radiant Mobile on Easter just launched the first ever Christian wireless service. We're going to talk literally what that means and figuratively as well. So it's being marketed, like I said, as a Christian wireless service. So on its face, it's trying to promote these ideas around safety and Christian values. It's going to be curated. It will have built-in security protections that you literally can't override. So that's interesting within the framework. So what does that represent then in the broader context of ideology entering consumer products? Because, your brother or your sister or something might not adhere to the same belief system, but let's say you're all on mom and dad's plan. You're sort of going to be forced to use this product. It's got some sinister overtones to me, but what do you think of the fact that there's security built in that you cannot override?
Well, I think that's that's kind of the point. It's like the thought police a little bit,
Ooh.
And I think, this right here is the perfect example of kind of what we're talking about up top. It's who is defining safety, who is defining values.
Yes.
And so as we establish Christian nationalism, it rejects the separation of church and state, and it frequently positions itself in opposition to the rights and full inclusion of honestly all marginalized groups.
Yeah.
So, and I think this is also kind of traces back to the perfect example between personal religion and how you might view your kind of spiritual belief in this white Christian nationalism. Because on one hand, there are forms of Christianity and spirituality that center a version of Jesus rooted in empathy and solidarity. He himself was a marginalized figure who would have been a brown man living under an empire that, wanted to persecute him, and did. And, but the idea of Christian nationalism is in opposition to so much of this. And that's what really this Radiant Mobile sells a lot. So it's pushing things like anti-LGBTQ rhetoric. It doesn't want to teach you about the history of slavery. It doesn't want to teach you about white supremacy. It wants to enforce ICE raids and these strict boundaries and things like that. And so whenever that's the type of content that's being pushed out under the guise of safety and values, what it's really selling is an oppressive ideology. And it's really propaganda in its purest form. And when I say it's selling something, it literally is selling something, because we're not just talking about spreading this propaganda, person to person. It's really, you're profiting off of this. This is a company that is making a profit off of this oppressive ideology. And I think that is something that we haven't seen. Well, churches are always making money, but this is something we haven't seen as much until recently, I think.
And I just want to add to that, it's in partnership with Allot, ALLOT, which is a leading Israeli cybersecurity company trusted by major global carriers. This is a first network level protection. This is including pornography, explicit content, gambling, harmful digital influences. And I wanted to drill down on what does that mean? Because that harkens back to what you just said. Who gets to control the narrative. What does a harmful digital influence look like? Could that be us? Would we be considered harmful? Because we would be people that would be speaking to feminist ideology, matriarchal concepts, integration of one another into spaces, talking about our differences in a celebratory way. Is that considered anti-capitalism? Is that considered harmful rhetoric? So not only, to your point, are they literally creating this product, but what they're trying to do is shape an entire worldview. And my goodness, your phone is your world at this point.
Truly.
And I just want to add that we have some comments. I'm not going to read all of them right now, but Nick G has written a few, and he just said they're using Christian in the way that the Bugs wore an Edgar suit and Men in Black. For any of those millennials that might get that reference, that is so true. It's just sort of like this cover, so you can't really see what's going on underneath. And I think a lot of this, Jess, to your point, we talk about this a lot. There's coded language here throughout all of this as it refers back to what they're selling. What do you think of that?
Yeah, I mean, that's what I think the big disconnect here is. And I think that's why so many people who do value empathy and rights for all and equality and equity have been banging our heads against the wall for so long by seeing this co-opting of this religious language of morals and values and whatever, because it's literally selling policies at this point that are oppressing people, that are killing people, that are separating children from their families, that are literally harming children. We just saw the Supreme Court knock down a ban on conversion therapy in Colorado.
Yes.
That is something that directly harms. There is proven fact that conversion therapy harms children. And yet it's being sold as family values, that conversion therapy is something that's of family values. And it's so disingenuous. It's so disgusting. And it's like, it's really wild wordplay. And what I'm interested in from your perspective, Natalie, on more of the journalistic end of things, whenever we hear them kind of censoring data and things like that, from a journalist perspective and an ethics perspective, what does that raise concerns for you in your practice?
No, I think that's a very fair question. We're already living in these silos, right? We're already living in echo chambers. What this is going to do further is create false realities for people to completely incubate themselves within. I was just at an incredible conference last week for the Online News Association, and we talked about defending the First Amendment and what that actually looks like in practice as journalists. And a lot of them were saying now is not the time to be neutral. Now is the time to be truthful. But if you're manipulating the data and if you're hiding or omitting facts, that's not being truthful, right? So I think what concerns me, Jess, about something like this is when a company that has a very specific agenda is allowed to start censoring information, you are now allowing a space where someone's worldview is going to be completely warped. They could say something as simple as, the flu vaccine is not available this year. That could be a part of their ad campaign. Who the hell knows? And so you're going to have all these people that this is their only form of information gathering, that they're going to see, oh, I can't get a flu shot this year. And that could really impact their health. That's like just a very small example of what that could do. And so I think what we're seeing is there's always this fear of government oversight, this fear of government regulation. But what we've allowed is such an unfettered, toxic form of capitalism to exist in this country that the corporations are now censoring us in ways that we can't control or mitigate because we don't have say in those systems, unlike we do with the government being able to have elections and being able to vote people in or out or being civically engaged. So from a journalistic perspective, I'm very worried that this is going to further sequester, divide, separate, and actually brainwash people into a reality that doesn't exist. It's terrifying.
And we're already seeing that with algorithms, but at least, which is so scary. And that's how a lot of this ideology even gained the amount of traction that it has now, is because we know, once I talk a lot about alt-right rabbit holes or online rabbit holes. As soon as you start getting fed just a little bit of this information and you start engaging with it, maybe just because you find it shocking, maybe because there's a piece of content that fear mongers, or it elicits an emotional reaction from you, you're naturally going to spend more time on that piece of content. And from there, the algorithm starts feeding you more and more of that type of radicalized information until next thing you know, you're deep into this online radicalization that we see. And at least with the algorithms, you still have that might be your whole for you page, but you see maybe a friend share some type of fact checking thing on their story, or you might share something, you have a friend push back on that, or something like that. There's still ways to break out of these echo chambers in our algorithms. It's getting harder, but there are still opportunities. What scares me about something like Radiant Mobile, it seems like that won't even be possible. All of that is going to be blocked. Any type of contradictory belief that goes against this Christian ideal is going to be blocked. And so much of this is anti-science. So much of this isn't based in fact. And that is, I just don't see how.
She's
like at a loss for words, because now I'm thinking, oh my God.
I know.
Now I'm thinking about school. I'm thinking about kids in school. You're going to school. You're learning about science. You're learning about like evolution and vaccines and things like that, or like just literally science, not even politicized, just science.
Right.
And then you're on your phone trying to like do your homework.
It's telling you that the Earth's flat and it's been 5,000 years old, and you're like, wait, this isn't what my teacher just told me. No, it sets up this dichotomy of suspicion, paranoia, and questioning, but not in a way to get to truth, in a way to get to the answer that you're wanting to get to. It's that reinforcement. It's that bias that sends you right back to what you want to hear and not necessarily what you need to hear. And what's scary about this is it's really trickling into other aspects. We're seeing like this whole parallel Christian consumer economy, right? So it's not just phone plans, it's gyms, coffee shops, these homeschooling networks. I mean, I don't know if you've been paying attention to even Netflix or these different streaming services, but there's this very covert sort of way in which now they're presenting Christian content that I didn't even see maybe 2 years ago. But now I'm seeing it everywhere. And some people might say, oh, Natalie, well, there's always been the Hallmark Channel, which is sort of Christian coded, et cetera.
But I do Christmas movies.
Girl, but I do think that this has like been bumped up the next level. I mean, I remember when Mel Gibson did Passion of the, that whole thing. And I remember how people pushed back on it, this idea that, it was sort of starting to infiltrate mainstream media, these particular sets of values. And I think we have to be really mindful because, to your point, what you said earlier, there's a brand of Christianity that's very tolerant, empathic, stands in solidarity with vulnerable communities. They're not being welcomed into these Christian spaces. These are very much intertwined with patriarchy, white supremacy, anti-immigration. Really, it's a toxic cycle, and it's one that makes people very unhappy, which I do find interesting that it still continues to take root when we see the ramifications generation after generation of people that leave the church, that leave these spaces because they're miserable.
Right, 100%. And kind of going back to the Netflix of it all, we always have to kind of pull in a pop culture reference, but I know there was a lot of discourse around this recent filming of Love is Blind, and I didn't watch the season, but I did tune into a lot of discourse, and I saw a lot of takes and things like that. And it's interesting. You kind of like have to start asking yourself, at what point did these larger corporations, are they complicit in allowing some of this messaging? Because I know they allowed body shaming on there. I know they allowed people to really talk about how finding someone who aligned with their version of Christianity was very important. And like I said, I didn't watch it, so I don't know how, in depth they got. But I do know I did see something where there was one woman who said a deal breaker for her was if somebody voted for Trump, and I know they cut that out. But whenever we're talking about...
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. And they wouldn't show any of that. She went right into the pod. She said, my biggest deal breaker is who did you vote for? And if they said Trump, she walked out. And none of that was aired.
Really?
But, yes. But they will air people saying that a deal breaker for them is if they don't align with Christianity, especially when we know so much of Christianity in the current context is political. It aligns with a lot of these political forces that are pushing a lot of these anti-LGBTQ laws that are really patriarchal, that are aligned with ICE, all those different kinds of things. And those conversations are allowed to be had. And
Oh,
I think that's really
okay.
interesting.
Okay, now you just got me going
Yeah.
because I don't know if you watched Hulu's latest series, Chrisley's Back to Reality.
Is that with the
The
Chrisleys?
Chrisleys that went to jail and then got pardoned by Trump because Savannah just knocked on every door.
I
You
have
have to
not,
watch it.
but
You have to watch it from a social worker's perspective. It's not what you think.
Okay.
It's very documentary style about the aftermath of this family's fall from grace. It is fascinating. But what's interesting, and I thought while I'm watching it, because obviously parts of it, especially towards the end of the season, because I don't think it got renewed, and I know why.
Yeah.
They're wearing a lot of MAGA hats on camera. They're wearing 45, 47, Make America Great Again, the whole thing. And I thought, I've never really seen that in a show like this, because I understand Trump pardoned her parents.
Yeah.
And they were very clear that they were very happy that Trump did that. It felt very performative. It was very over the top. And I thought, I wonder if there had been somebody that wanted to wear, a pro-abortion hat, or, abolish ICE pin, if they would have been able to, because it's interesting who's allowed to promote what brand of, Christianity, because all they talk about on the show is how Christian they all are.
Of course.
And then you see all the grifting, you see a lot of the charade of their family business falling apart. You see the infighting. Jess, it's so interesting. But it brings it back to the point that you just made around Love is Blind, is what messages make it through the censors and which ones do not, when in particular with these mainstream media outlets, and in particular with these streaming services that we know are owned by the billionaire class.
And that's what's so scary too, is because we're continuing to see more and more consolidation. We're seeing all these legacy networks combining and being bought by these billionaires. We see these tech giants all buying up our algorithms. And whenever they're in bed politically with this administration, what kind of content is going to continue to be pushed? And I think that's so concerning.
And I got to say, Nick, you make a good point here. And I want to bring this to your attention too, Jess, that he says the AEW has a wrestler who wears Fuck ICE shirts every match. He said the crowd chants for it all of the time. And here's what's interesting. And Jess, I want your thoughts on this. I agree that the anti-ICE rhetoric, the pro diversity rhetoric, I think that's actually the mainstream opinion. I think people do want women to have rights in the United States. Like, that's what's so scary, is because I don't believe that the white Christian nationalist movement is the movement of the masses, but because they are being fed through their lens, they think they are. So they're really emboldened. What do you think that does in terms of connections to political violence?
Oh, gosh. Well, I have to mull that one over a little bit. What's your initial take?
Because I think for me, it's like, it emboldens them, Jess.
Yeah.
It's like this idea that they think that the Kyle Rittenhouses of the world are the majority. So they're righteous in their violence, right? Because we see the rise of the political right goes right along with political violence. Like, this is not something that hasn't happened over and over again. So if you're in that echo chamber, do you think this could increase the likelihood of violence if you think that everybody's out to get you that's not a white Christian nationalist?
100%, because that's all that is. I mean, you hear even in this, I have it highlighted somewhere in here in the brief about Radiant Mobile. It's all about, here it is, take back the internet. It's all about security. It's about, it says, instead of an internet that's filled with darkness, distraction, and danger, it's all of this language that is very much like, it's about this enemy. It's about this other. It's about this dark, shadowy figure that's coming to get you. And that's what's so much. That's why they fearmonger around trans people. That's why they fearmonger around immigrants. That's why they fearmonger around women. I mean, even a strong woman tries to be oppressed. It is always this othering of you're in danger, of this class that really is doesn't have any type of oppression, really has all of the power in the world. But it's this
Mm.
idea that there is that you are in danger all the time. And so, yes, of course, that leads to political violence. And like I said, political violence is something that
Mm.
has been a fabric of America. I mean, slavery is political violence. What
Yeah.
the genocide of Native Americans is political violence. Like it really is a fabric of American society, and the way that we paint all of this through this idea of morals, values, and of safety is what allows it to spread. And what I think too is I do like to think that this ideology is the minority.
Mhm.
Unfortunately, I think they have a lot of political power right now, though.
Oh, totally.
And
No,
so I
no,
think
they
that's
are they are
where,
a strongly
yeah,
they are a strong funded
yes,
political minor 100%, which is why I think they look bigger than
then
they
they
are
actually
because
are.
they have all the money, no
Right,
doubt.
right,
No doubt.
right.
And you made a good point, like when you were saying some of those words that Radiant Mobile was talking about, and they used the word darkness.
Yeah,
That is also just like such coded language
yeah,
for like, blackness. I mean,
100%.
anytime you hear, about, the dark figures or the, we're protecting people from these dark forces. They're talking about black people. Like they're finding different ways to say it, but it all triggers people's fear centers the same way. And furthering that isolation, you do become more fearful of people that you don't know. It feeds into itself. It's like a negative feedback loop.
And that's what I talk a lot too about these alt-right pipelines online. You hear a lot of that language, especially content that's framed for women. And a lot of times people will say, Jess, you're reaching, you're reaching. And I'm like, no, I'm not. And I stand firmly in the stance that no, I'm not. You just have to dive into a little bit more. But the way that we hear, especially I talk about like clean beauty or anything around like clean beauty, clean wellness,
Mm.
is all about,
Purity.
yeah, purity. It's all about
Mhm.
purity. It's all about it's always in this kind of like, yeah, I talked about even like the color of the year this
Yes.
past year, which is literally white. And about how that is linked to to white supremacy. Everyone's like, that's a reach, that's a reach. No, it's not. Whenever
It's
you're looking
not.
at how these things are branded on the larger scale, it's really not. And I think the once you kind of wake up to that coded language, you really start to see it everywhere.
Yeah, 100%. As we wrap this up, I just want to talk a little bit about the reality and where we go from here.
Yeah.
Because Radiant Mobile has launched. It is a product on the market. I'm sure it will be pushed in the mega churches all over the country. The fact that, I'm an independent journalist, Jess, it was a press release that was sent to me unironically across my desk, that they were hoping for coverage. So if I received it, and I'm just a little journalist, think of
Wow.
how many big media houses also received this. The fact that they had a press release about it, this just shows you guys the level of not just funding, but it's well orchestrated. It's well organized. And I think this is the major problem that the left continues to have. They do not have a clear vision of messaging for the future. And I understand we're all not going to align on all things, but we got to get it together somehow because they know their message. Like they know what it is. It is white, Christian, male centered and dominated society,
Mhm.
period.
Period.
We need to figure out, are we embracing matriarchy? Are we embracing working class values?
Yeah.
What are we embracing class consciousness? What is our message? Because I'm very concerned that we're losing out, not because there's not enough of us, but because we don't know how to get it together with our talking points.
And so much of it is just the opposition party, and so much, and we talked a little bit about this offline, Natalie, but
Mhm.
so much. It's easy for the left to get really caught up in being the party of opposition, and while I think it's important to take a stance against all of this, it's also okay. So, what does a world look like without this? Because I think that's what a lot of people struggle to see is what does a world look like that is uh, more aligned with the matriarchy? What does a world look like that is more abolitionist centered? Like a lot of people
Mhm.
can't conceptualize life outside of
Mm-mm.
these oppressive systems. And we need to start showing people what world is actually possible.
Yeah. And make them feel as though they deserve that world.
Yes.
Because so much of this internalization of messaging, white supremacist messaging, is intended to make you feel like garbage.
Right.
And that's the point. When you don't think that you deserve anything, you'll allow the strong man to come in and take hold. I interviewed he's running for Senate in Mississippi. If he wins, he'll be the first Black senator of Mississippi in 150 years. His name's Scott Colomb, and that is going to drop tomorrow on my Substack. But the reason I'm bringing him up is I asked him, what are the issues that Mississippians are telling you that they want? And it came back to three things. It came down to the cost of living is too high, there's no living wage, and there's no health care. When you break it down, if we just focused on those basic rights of how we get to exist as a human without feeling the crushing burdens of all of these oppressive systems that you just named, what could we really achieve? And I think it strips it down to we all deserve a chance to thrive.
Yes.
Period.
Period. And so much of what this messaging does, especially I'll talk about around women, because that's why I spend a lot of my content talking about, is kind of through this trad wife narrative of like, your godly potential is to be a caregiver in the home. And that's where you're going to find the most fulfillment. And feminism and leftism is lying to you about having to like join into this hustle culture or whatever.
Yeah.
What the left needs to be doing is saying, if you want to stay at home and you want to provide for your family, that is great, but your labor shouldn't go unpaid. Here is what paid leave looks like. Here is how it's more sustainable for you to get your autonomy, but to still be able to be paid for the labor of keeping home and of providing for children. It doesn't have to, like, a whole different world is possible that people don't understand. You don't have to subscribe to this ideology. You can work for a more equitable society for all of us, and that's going to support everybody. And I think some of that gets lost.
Ooh, Jess Britfish, 2028. I like it. No, but I think that totally makes sense, because the reality is feminism isn't telling you can't have babies and be a mother. What it's telling you, to your point, is all of that matters. Your life matters too. I look at my grandmothers who both held the purse strings in their families. And I remember my grandmother telling me specifically, always have runaway money.
Yeah.
She said that to me. She was born before the Depression. Like, the reality is women have always figured out ways to circumvent systems that did not support them. We couldn't even have credit cards till the 70s. Okay, you guys, you couldn't even get a home, a mortgage. There were so many obstacles and barriers that would allow you to live a full and fulfilling life, whatever that you. And so this idea that this subversive content that I'm so glad you rail against all the time, because people need to hear it in a way that they can digest, and you do it so beautifully. And I love what you do, but it's true. But the reality is we need that counter message so people understand this isn't about control.
Yeah.
We're trying to control your life. We're trying to set you up.
You shouldn't have to give up your bodily autonomy. You shouldn't have to give up your financial autonomy in order to be a mother. Live in a system that is so set up against any type of person. I'm just content around what happens is this white Christian nationalism or whatever don't feel supported in this current system. It's because you're not aligning with your godly right to be a caregiver or whatever. And it convinces you to give up that bodily autonomy, to give up that financial independence, that you are going to be more fulfilled aligning with this. Whereas the alternative is saying, no, you can still, but let's put social safety nets in place to make it safer for you, to make you be able to be more independent, more fulfilled, to create a safer life for yourself and your family. And I think that's what we need to really start to people, because that's how a lot of people get pulled into this, is because they're frustrated with the systems that we currently have. So
100%.
Let's burn them all.
That's it. This is not a binary. This is I said this the other day. I'm like, step out of the building with the glass ceiling. Just get out of the building and let's form a circle on the grass and reimagine everything, because this isn't serving us. So we should not be serving it, for our own demise. Oh, Jess Britvich, we could go on and on and on. There's so much more to cover. I love when we do a deep dive on a topic. If people want to learn more about your content, where can they go?
Yes, I'm on Instagram and TikTok. Instagram mainly just at Jess Britvich, and I'm also here on Substack at Jess Britvich.
She's also here on Substack with me all the time too, you guys.
Yes,
so
yes.
we're working on a fun project, her and I, and aligning our ambitions together. And I'm really looking forward to being able to tell you more about that when the time comes. But until then, you can catch us here. And I'm just so excited to continue to do this work together. And also, please make sure you subscribe to both of us above. Every subscription really helps to push our content out so more people can engage with it, since we don't have the money machine of the right behind us. Okay. And as always, everyone, and thanks, Nick, by the way. Nick has been our top commenter of the day. Nick G, a dude on the couch. You know, you've been just, we couldn't get to all of them, but we appreciate all of your wonderful thoughts and comments.
Great.
Absolutely. And until next time, as always, everyone, please take care of yourselves and each other. Thanks so much, Jess. I'll see you soon.
Thank you.
Bye.